Against the golden sunset of the western plains, Sarah stumbles across parched earth, one hand cradling her swollen belly. 8 months pregnant with nothing but the clothes on her back and bruises that tell a story of escape. Miles from anywhere, her strength fails as she collapses near an old ranch gate. That's where Ethan finds her, a man who swore never to let another soul into his life after tragedy took everything he loved. With reluctant hands, he carries her to safety, not knowing her desperate husband has already hired men to track her down. Can two broken souls find redemption in each other before the past catches up to destroy them both? The weathered ranch deed sat framed on Ethan Miller's office wall, edges yellowed with age. 15 years he'd owned this place, and each passing season had only deepened his isolation. Ethan trudged across his front porch, boots heavy with red clay from checking fence lines. The setting sun cast long shadows across the valley as he paused, squinting at an unusual shape near his gate. Probably another calf wandered off from the Henderson place. As he approached, the shape became clearer. Not a calf. A woman. He quickened his pace, heart hammering against his ribs. She lay crumpled in the dirt, one arm protectively curved around her swollen belly. Her face was pale beneath streaks of dust and bruises mottled her exposed skin. "Ma'am." His voice cracked from disuse. When she didn't respond, he knelt beside her, noting the wedding band on her finger. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but remained closed. Ethan glanced back toward town. 15 miles of rough country. Doc Wilson wouldn't make it before nightfall, and the woman's breathing seemed labored. With a deep sigh, he carefully gathered her into his arms, surprised at how light she felt despite her pregnancy. He hadn't brought a stranger into his home in nearly a decade. The cabin was sparse but clean. Ethan laid her gently on his bed, covering her with his grandmother's quilt. Her face was young, maybe late 20s, but lined with something beyond exhaustion. Whatever had driven her here hadn't been kind. He stoked the fire and set water to boil, then dampened a cloth to clean the dirt from her face. When the cool cloth touched her brow, her eyes flew open, wide and terrified. "Don't—" She scrambled back against the headboard. "You're safe!" Ethan stepped back, hands raised. "Found you passed out by my gate. Name's Ethan Miller. This is my ranch." She glanced frantically around the room, one hand protective over her belly. "Where am I?" "About 15 miles east of Cottonwood." He kept his voice even. "You're in no shape to travel. Storm's coming too." As if on cue, thunder rumbled in the distance. The woman's shoulders sagged slightly. "Sarah," she whispered. "My name is Sarah. You need a doctor, Sarah. Baby doing all right?" She nodded slowly. "Just tired. Hungry." Her eyes never left his face, studying him like a cornered animal assessing danger. "Can make you something to eat. Then rest. Whatever you're running from won't find you tonight." Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, that he'd guessed her situation so easily. "Not asking questions," Ethan added. "Not my business. But you're welcome to shelter here till morning." She seemed to measure his words, weighing sincerity against fear. Finally she nodded. "Thank you." Ethan prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. He ate at his desk while she sat on the edge of the bed, devouring the food with the desperation of someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. "My husband," she said suddenly, setting her empty plate aside. "He'll come looking." Ethan met her gaze. "Figured as much." Those bruises didn't come from falling down. Sarah's hand instinctively touched her cheek. "He has connections, money. Town's small. Strangers get noticed." He rose to take her plate. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we'll figure what's next." After Sarah had fallen into exhausted slumber, Ethan sat by the fire cleaning his rifle. Outside, rain began to fall, and memories he'd long suppressed flickered through his mind. His wife's laugh, his son's small hand in his, the telegram that changed everything. He glanced at the woman in his bed. Whatever her story, it had led her to his doorstep. Tomorrow, she'd likely move on, and his life would return to its quiet routine. For tonight, though, he'd stand watch. His ghosts could share space with hers, just until morning. The wedding ring felt heavy on Sarah's finger as she twisted it absently. Warning light filtered through the cabin windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Outside, she could hear Ethan chopping wood, the rhythmic thud providing an oddly comforting backdrop. 3 years ago, she'd slipped this gold band on with such hope. James Blackwood had seemed everything a woman could want: handsome, wealthy, respected in Portland society. His family owned shipping concerns up and down the coast, and at 26, Sarah had been flattered by his attention. "You'll never want for anything," he'd promised, kissing her hand while her parents beamed. The changes came slowly. First, small criticisms. Her dress was too bright, her laugh too loud at parties. Then controlling the household accounts, choosing her friends. By their first anniversary, the first slap had come, followed by tearful apologies and promises. Sarah's fingers traced the fading bruise on her cheekbone. The baby kicked, a reassuring flutter beneath her ribs. The door opened and Ethan entered, removing his hat. "Coffee's hot," he said, nodding toward the stove. He carried a stack of clean clothes. "Found these. Belong to my—" He paused. "They'll be big, but clean. Thank you." Sarah accepted the clothing, noticing how he avoided meeting her eyes. "I'll be gone tomorrow." "I can pay you when I reach—" "No need." He poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. "Where you headed?" Sarah stared into the dark liquid. "My aunt lives in California. San Francisco." Ethan nodded, not commenting on the obvious. San Francisco was hundreds of miles away, and she was in no condition for such a journey. "Blackwood," he said suddenly. "Heard your mumblings in sleep. That your husband?" "James Blackwood." Sarah's hands trembled. "You know him?" "Know of him? His company runs supply routes through here sometimes." Ethan's face remained neutral. Man with reach. Cold fear washed through her. "I need to leave now." "Calm yourself," Ethan said. "Nobody's coming today. Roads are washed out from the storm. You don't understand." "He'll find me. Why'd you run?" The question came softly, without judgment. Sarah's hand cradled her belly. "I overheard him. With the doctor." Her voice caught. "He doesn't want the baby." Said it would. Complicate things with his new business partner's daughter. The memory still cut like glass. "He arranged for the baby to be taken after. Said I was unstable, needed extended care." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And the bruises." "I confronted him." Sarah closed her eyes. "He locked me in our room. I climbed out the window that night. Took what money I could find and ran." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the popping of the fire. "Rest today," Ethan finally said. "Doc Wilson comes by tomorrow for my supply order. He can check you over discreetly." Sarah studied him, this quiet man who'd offered shelter with no expectations. "Why help me?" Something flashed in his eyes, pain, recognition. "Got my reasons." Later, after a simple lunch, Sarah ventured to the porch. The ranch spread before her, modest but well-maintained. A few cattle grazed in the distance. Ethan worked in the barn, repairing tack. Her hand traced patterns on her swollen belly. 7 weeks until her due date. 7 weeks to disappear where James couldn't find her. The baby would need a safe place to be born. She watched Ethan's strong, sure movements. He carried pain like a familiar companion, yet it hadn't hardened him completely. There was kindness in how he'd tucked the blanket around her last night, in the gentle way he'd set breakfast before her. The wedding ring caught the sunlight. With sudden resolve, Sarah twisted it off and tucked it into her pocket. James had never seen her as anything but a possession. Perhaps it was time to stop seeing herself through his eyes. The old family photograph sat face down in the bottom drawer of Ethan's desk. He rarely looked at it anymore. But tonight, with Sarah sleeping in the next room, he found himself sliding it out, dust coating his fingertips. 3 smiling faces looked back at him. His wife Catherine, golden-haired and laughing. Their son Jacob, just 5, missing his front teeth. And himself, younger, with fewer lines etched around his eyes. It had been taken 3 weeks before the influenza swept through their Colorado mining town. 2 weeks before he'd buried them both on a wind-swept hill. A floorboard creaked behind him. Ethan quickly returned the photo to the drawer. "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly from the doorway. "I didn't mean to intrude." Should be resting, Ethan replied, his voice gruff. The baby is restless tonight. She moved into the room, one hand supporting her lower back. Who were they? Ethan stiffened. What makes you think your eyes? She interrupted gently. I recognize grief when I see it. For a moment he considered sending her back to bed with a sharp word. Instead, he found himself speaking. My wife, my son, 10 years ago. Sarah lowered herself carefully into the chair opposite his desk. I'm sorry. Influenza. I was away, working a cattle drive. By the time I got the telegram, his voice trailed off. And you came here afterward? Ethan nodded. Bought this place. Needed somewhere different. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the fire crackling in the hearth. Dr. Wilson arrives tomorrow, Ethan finally said, changing the subject. Good man, discreet. Will he report me to the authorities? Anxiety edged her voice. Doc keeps his own counsel. Besides, no crime in being pregnant and needing help. Ethan paused. Should tell you, though. Town talks. Martha at the general store. She'll hear I've got company from Doc. Questions will follow. I can leave after the doctor visits, Sarah offered. Though her pale face suggested the journey would be difficult, Ethan studied her. Then, despite the pregnancy, dark circles under her eyes. Winter's coming. Stage runs are regular this time of year. Might be prudent to regain your strength first. Relief washed over her features. I can work. Cook, clean to earn my keep. Not necessary, please, she insisted. I won't be a charity case. Something about her determination stirred respect in him. As you wish. The next morning, Doc Wilson's buggy rattled up to the cabin. A portly man with kind eyes beneath bushy brows, he greeted Ethan with a firm handshake before noticing Sarah in the doorway. Well now, he said, removing his hat. Didn't know you had company, Ethan. Sarah needs medical attention, Ethan replied simply. Appreciate your discretion. The doctor's eyes took in Sarah's condition and the fading bruises on her face. Understanding dawned in his expression. Of course. Let's have a look at mother and child, shall we? While the doctor examined Sarah in the bedroom, Ethan paced the porch. The last woman he'd brought to Doc Wilson had been Catherine, her skin burning with fever, Jacob already gone. Mother's undernourished but recovering, Doc said afterward, closing his bag. Baby seems healthy enough. Due in about 6 weeks, I'd estimate. She'll be all right to travel, Ethan asked. Doc Wilson's eyebrows rose. Not for a while yet. And certainly not before delivering. He lowered his voice. This young lady running from something, Ethan? Someone, Ethan corrected. Husband. Bad sort. Ah. The doctor nodded slowly. Martha's been asking why you missed Sunday supplies. Mentioned strangers in town asking questions about new arrivals. Ethan's spine stiffened. When? 2 days ago. Didn't think much of it then. Doc Wilson glanced toward the house. Might be unrelated. Or might not. Appreciate the warning. Doc Wilson placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Been good to see you taking an interest in something besides cattle and fence posts. A smile crinkled his eyes, even if the circumstances are unfortunate. After the doctor left, Ethan found Sarah by the window, her expression troubled. Someone's looking for me, she said. Not a question. Maybe, maybe not. He began cleaning his rifle, a habit when troubled. Either way, you're safe here for now. The telegram arrived at the Cottonwood Western Union office on a Tuesday morning. The operator, young Billy Jenkins, recognized the name immediately. Everyone in 3 counties knew of James Blackwood's shipping empire, seeking information on whereabouts of my wife, Stop Sarah. Blackwood stop 8 months with child, stop mentally unstable and requires medical attention, stop, $500 reward for safe. Return, stop, James Blackwood, stop. Billy whistled low. $500 was more than he'd make in a year. He glanced at the second telegram that had arrived simultaneously, addressed to the sheriff. Meanwhile, at Ethan's ranch, 2 weeks had passed since Sarah's arrival. The morning air carried autumn's first chill as she hung laundry, her movements more confident than when she'd first arrived. The small domestic routine gave her purpose. Inside, Ethan reviewed his ledgers. Winter preparations would require a trip to town, something he'd been postponing. With Sarah's condition improving and no sign of pursuit, perhaps the danger had passed. A sharp cry from outside shattered his thoughts. He found Sarah doubled over by the clothesline, clutching her belly. "Something's wrong," she gasped, panic in her eyes. The baby, Ethan helped her to the house, his mind racing. 6 weeks early. Too soon? Breathe slow, he instructed, settling her on the bed. "I'll fetch, Doc." "No!" She clutched his arm. "It's passing. Just a pain," but her face had gone grey and sweat beaded her forehead. When another spasm hit minutes later, Ethan made his decision. Staying here could risk you both. "We're going to town." The journey was agonizing. Every rut in the road elicited a gasp from Sarah, huddled under blankets in the wagon bed. Ethan pushed the horses harder than he liked, his jaw set with determination. In Cottonwood, Doc Wilson's face grew grave after examining Sarah in his back office. "Not labor," he confirmed, "but she needs rest, proper food. Blood pressure's concerning." "How long?" Ethan asked. "Week at least." "Can't risk moving her." The doctor lowered his voice. "There's another matter. Sheriff wants a word." Outside, Sheriff Miller waited on the porch, hat in hands. A weathered man with shrewd eyes. He'd known Ethan since his arrival in Cottonwood. "Heard you brought in a woman. Pregnant." Ethan straightened. "Family friend?" "Having complications." "Family friend," the sheriff repeated, skepticism evident. "Name wouldn't happen to be Sarah Blackwood." Ice formed in Ethan's stomach. "Who's asking?" Sheriff Miller produced a telegram. "Her husband. Claims she's unstable, ran off with his child. She with you willingly." The sheriff studied Ethan's face. "Not being held against her will. Ask her yourself." Inside, Sarah sat propped against pillows, her face tight with pain and fear as the sheriff approached. "Mrs. Blackwood." "I'm Sheriff Miller. Your husband's looking for you. Offering reward." "I can't go back," Sarah whispered, tears forming. Please, ma'am, if you're being kept against your will." "She isn't," Ethan interrupted. "Tell him, Sarah." She drew a shaky breath. "My husband. He's not what people think. He was going to take my baby." The sheriff's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes. "Serious accusation. Look at the bruises," Ethan said quietly. "Some still haven't healed." Sheriff Miller sighed. "Got no jurisdiction over marital disputes, long as no laws are broken." He rubbed his jaw. "But I should warn you, there's men in town. Asking questions. Not local. Bounty hunters," Ethan surmised. "Likely. Blackwood's reward is substantial." The sheriff replaced his hat. "Doc, how soon before she can travel?" "Week minimum. And that's risky. Keep her here that long." "Word will spread." The sheriff looked at Ethan. "And Blackwood has friends in the territorial government." After he left, silence hung heavy in the room. "He'll come himself now," Sarah whispered. That night, Sarah's condition stabilized enough for a whispered conversation as Ethan sat beside her bed at Doc Wilson's house. "I've put you in danger," she said. Her fingers twisting the blanket. "Made my choice," he replied. "Made it the moment I found you." "Why?" Her eyes searched his. "Why risk everything for a stranger?" Ethan was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "After Catherine and Jacob died," he finally said, "I was lost. Drinking, fighting. One night in Denver, a man pulled me from a gutter, gave me shelter. Asked nothing in return." He met her gaze. "Never knew his name. But I swore if I ever found someone needing what he gave me." Sarah's hand found his, their fingers interlocking. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know." He squeezed gently. "But you're not alone anymore." Their eyes held, something unspoken passing between them. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. The medicine box sat open on the kitchen table, its contents neatly arranged by Ethan's methodical hands. Tinctures of willow bark for pain, dried herbs for tea, and bandages lined the weathered wooden container, a silent testimony to his newfound role as protector. 3 days had passed since Sarah's scare. Doc Wilson had reluctantly agreed she could recover at the ranch rather than in town, where curious eyes would multiply rumors. The journey back had been slow and careful, with Ethan insisting on frequent stops. Despite Sarah's assurances, she felt stronger. "Drink this." Ethan placed a steaming cup beside her chair. "Doc's special blend for the baby." Sarah inhaled the earthy aroma. Smells like wet hay. A rare smile tugged at his lips. Tastes worse, she sipped obediently, hiding her grimace. Outside, late afternoon sun painted the distant mountains gold. After weeks of fear, the ranch had begun to feel like sanctuary. Sheriff Miller rode by this morning, Ethan said, checking the fire. While you were resting, Sarah's hand stilled. What did he want? Brought news. Those men in town asking questions. They've moved on. Headed north. Relief washed over her. They think I've left the territory. Seems so. Ethan didn't add what else the sheriff had mentioned, that James Blackwood had telegraphed again, increasing the reward to $800. Enough to tempt even honest men. I've been thinking, Sarah said, setting aside her cup. When I'm recovered, I should learn to shoot. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A gun? I won't be helpless again. Determination hardened her voice. Not with my child's life at stake. He studied her, noting the steel beneath her gentle exterior. Rifle might be heavy in your condition. Good start with a revolver. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of an approaching wagon. Ethan moved to the window, hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. It's Martha, he said, relaxing slightly. From the general store. The plump, gray-haired woman bustled in minutes later, arms laden with packages. Her keen eyes took in Sarah's presence with undisguised curiosity. Brought those supplies you ordered, Ethan, she announced. And some things for the lady. Doc Wilson mentioned she might need feminine necessities. Sarah flushed. That's very kind. Martha Jenkins, the older woman introduced herself, setting down her bundles. Ethan never was one for social niceties. Sarah, she replied simply, omitting her last name. Martha's eyes softened as she took in Sarah's condition. Doc said you had a rough spell. Baby doing all right? Better now, thank you. Good, good. Martha began unpacking items, fabric for baby clothes, a tin of special tea, knitting needles and soft yarn. Every child deserves a proper welcome, no matter the circumstances. The genuine kindness brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. Town's buzzing with talk, Martha continued, seemingly casual but watching their reactions. Men asking about a pregnant woman? Offering money for information? Ethan and Sarah exchanged glances. Strange men don't usually cause such interest in Cottonwood, Martha observed. Unless there's reason. Martha, Ethan began, a warning in his tone. No need to explain. The older woman waved him off. Some situations speak for themselves. She nodded towards Sarah's fading bruises. My sister Josephine had a husband like that. Ran off to Denver, changed her name. Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly at the unexpected alliance. Just so you know, Martha continued, half the town's decided you're Ethan's long-lost sister, come to give birth away from scandal. Other half thinks you're his secret wife, hidden away these past years. Despite everything, Sarah laughed. And what do you think, Mrs. Jenkins? I think, Martha said deliberately, that everyone deserves sanctuary when they need it. And I think our Ethan's been alone too long. She patted Sarah's hand. Rest well, dear. I'll be by next week with more supplies. After Martha left, Sarah examined the baby items with wonder. She didn't even ask questions. Martha lost a daughter years back, Ethan explained, sorting supplies. Young girl, bad situation. Always had a soft spot for women in trouble. She's the first person who's been kind without wanting something in return. Sarah looked up at Ethan. Second? Their eyes met briefly before Ethan turned away, uncomfortable with the gratitude he saw there. Should teach you that shooting lesson tomorrow, he said gruffly, if you're feeling up to it. That night, Sarah stood at the window watching stars emerge. For the first time since fleeing Portland, tomorrow didn't terrify her. Something was changing, not just sanctuary found, but perhaps something more precious. Something like hope. The handmade baby blanket took shape beneath Sarah's fingers, soft yarn forming delicate patterns as she rocked in the chair by the fire. Martha had taught her the stitches yesterday, patient with Sarah's initially clumsy attempts. Now the rhythm soothed her, each loop and pull a small act of preparation, of hope. A month had passed since her arrival at the ranch. November winds howled outside, but inside the cabin was warm, with the scent of baking bread. Sarah had insisted on taking over kitchen duties, finding unexpected joy in creating order and nourishment. Ethan entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Storm's coming in fast. Got the livestock secured. There's stew keeping warm," Sarah said, setting aside her knitting. He nodded appreciation, moving to wash up. Their routine had developed naturally, Ethan handling the outdoor work while Sarah managed the domestic sphere. They moved around each other with growing ease, the initial awkwardness fading into comfortable familiarity. "Letter came," Ethan said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. Martha brought it out. "From Doc Wilson." Sarah accepted it nervously. The doctor had promised to inquire discreetly about James's activities through a medical colleague in Portland. "He's still there," she read aloud, relief evident. "Apparently entertaining business associates from San Francisco." Her hands trembled slightly. "But he's hired men to continue searching. 3 different groups working through the territories." Ethan's expression darkened. "Professional trackers?" "It doesn't say." Sarah folded the letter. "He won't stop, Ethan. We'll deal with that when it comes." He ladled stew into bowls. "How's the shooting coming along?" Sarah smiled faintly at his change of subject. "Better. Hit the can yesterday." "Which can?" "There were 5. The one in the middle," she admitted. Once, his low chuckle warmed her more than the fire. These moments, rare displays of Ethan's lighter side, had become precious to her. The taciturn rancher was gradually revealing layers beneath his gruff exterior. "When the baby comes," she said hesitantly, "I'll need to move on. I've been thinking California might not be far enough." Ethan paused, spoon midway to his mouth. "No need to decide now. I don't want to burden you indefinitely." "Not a burden," he replied quietly. "Ranch is different with you here." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Before Sarah could respond, hoofbeats approached outside. Ethan was on his feet instantly, reaching for his rifle. "Stay back," he ordered, moving to the window. His shoulders relaxed slightly. "Sheriff." Sheriff Miller stomped snow from his boots as he entered. His normally composed features were troubled. "Miller," Ethan greeted.
"Coffee?"
"Something stronger if you've got it." The sheriff nodded to Sarah. "Ma'am." "Looking well." Ethan poured whiskey into a tin cup. "What brings you out in this weather?" "Had a visitor today." Miller accepted the drink, downing half in one swallow. "Fancier sort than we usually see." Asked a lot of questions about new arrivals. Sarah's hand instinctively went to her belly. "Described himself as a business associate of James Blackwood," the sheriff continued. "Looking for his friend's runaway wife. Mentally unstable, he claimed. Dangerous to herself and the child." "You didn't," Ethan began. "Told him we get all sorts passing through, but nobody matching that description had stayed." Miller's eyes were steady. "Matt didn't believe me. Said he'd be in town a few days, asking around." "Description?" Ethan asked. "Tall, well-dressed. Called himself Andrews." The sheriff glanced at Sarah. "Seemed to know a lot about you." "Mrs. Blackwood, including that medicine you take for your condition." Sarah paled. "I don't take any medicine." "Exactly what concerned me." Miller finished his drink. "Man setting a narrative. Building a case. For what?" Ethan demanded. "Custody, I'd wager. Or commitment." The sheriff stood. "Wanted to warn you. Territory law gives husbands considerable rights. If he finds you, he won't," Ethan said firmly. "Be careful, Miller," Sarah said suddenly. "James doesn't forgive people who interfere with his plans." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Neither do I, ma'am." He collected his hat. "Storm will cover my tracks, but you might consider additional precautions." After he left, Sarah sat motionless, her knitting forgotten. "He's getting closer," she whispered. Ethan knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his. "Listen to me. While you're under my roof, no one will take you or your child. I swear it." Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the fierce determination there. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge what had been growing between them. This connection beyond mere charity or obligation. "I believe you," she said softly. The gun cabinet stood open, its contents spread across the kitchen table. Rifle, shotgun, 2 revolvers and boxes of ammunition. Ethan's arsenal, meticulously maintained over the years. Sarah watched as he cleaned each weapon with practiced hands, his movements deliberate and sure. Winchester's simplest, he explained, demonstrating the lever action. Load here, cock, aim, fire. He handed her the smaller revolver. This Smith & Wesson's lighter. Better for you. Sarah accepted the weapon, surprised at its weight despite its size. 2 weeks of practice had improved her aim considerably, though she still prayed she'd never need to use these skills. Andrews left town yesterday, Ethan continued, referring to James's associate. Sheriff says he headed west, not east. Looking in the wrong direction. For now, Sarah replied quietly. December had arrived with bitter cold, and her due date approached. The baby kicked vigorously, as if aware of the conversation. 4 weeks, according to Doc Wilson. Ethan nodded, reassembling the shotgun. Martha's arranged for her niece to help when the time comes. Girl trained as a midwife in Denver. The thoughtful preparation touched Sarah deeply. Somehow this remote ranch, with its taciturn owner, had become more home than anywhere she'd lived since childhood. "I've been thinking," she said carefully. "About after?" Ethan's hands stilled momentarily before continuing their work. "California still?" "I don't know anymore." Sarah rubbed her belly absently. "James has business connections throughout the West. His reaches—" She sighed. "Sometimes I think I'll never stop running." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the click of metal parts fitting together. "Could stay," Ethan said finally, his eyes fixed on the rifle in his hands. "Here after the baby comes." The simple words carried weight that made Sarah's heart quicken. "Ethan, ranch is large enough," he continued, still not looking at her. "Cabin's small but could build on. Come spring, it wouldn't be safe for you," she protested softly. "James would eventually track me here. Let him try." The steel in Ethan's voice matched the weapons before him. Their eyes met across the table, unspoken feelings hovering in the space between. The moment was interrupted by the sound of an approaching rider. Ethan moved swiftly to the window, rifle in hand. "It's Doc," he reported, tension easing from his shoulders. Doc Wilson's expression was grave as he entered, declining offers of coffee or food. "Andrews returned to town last night," he said without preamble. "With another man. They've been asking more pointed questions, specifically about you, Ethan." "Me? About whether you'd taken in any strays recently." The doctor's eyes flicked to Sarah. "They visited the land office this morning. Checking property records." Cold fear washed through Sarah. "They're connecting the pieces." "Gets worse," Doc continued. "Andrews presented papers to Sheriff Miller. Legal documents naming him guardian ad litem for Sarah Blackwood and her unborn child." "What does that mean?" Sarah whispered. "It means," Doc Wilson said grimly, "that if they find you, they have legal authority to take you into custody. For your own protection." Ethan's face hardened. "Miller won't enforce those papers. Miller doesn't have a choice." Doc removed his glasses, cleaning them wearily. "Andrews brought a letter from the territorial judge, Judge Hammond. He's an old friend of the Blackwood family, apparently." Sarah gripped the edge of the table, suddenly dizzy. "James is coming himself, isn't he?" Doc Wilson nodded reluctantly. Andrews let it slip. "Expected within the week." The room fell silent, the weight of the news settling around them. "There's more," Doc said. "Andrews has been spinning tales about your mental state, Sarah. Claims you've had episodes of violence, delusions. Says you threatened to harm yourself and the baby." "That's absurd," Sarah protested. "It's calculated," Ethan said quietly. "Building a case for commitment after the birth. Or before," Doc added grimly. "The papers grant Andrews authority to have you examined by physicians of his choosing." Sarah's hands trembled. Everything she feared was coming to pass. "We need to leave," Ethan said suddenly, decisively. "Tonight, head south into New Mexico territory. In her condition. In winter." Doc looked alarmed. "It could kill her and the baby both." "Staying could be worse." Ethan began gathering essentials. "I know a place. Remote hunting cabin in the mountains. Stocked with supplies." Doc Wilson watched him with troubled eyes. "You've thought about this. Always have a second plan." Ethan turned to Sarah. "Can you travel?" She nodded, finding strength in his certainty. "Yes, I'll bring the wagon around back. Pack only what you need." He paused, hand on her shoulder. "It'll be all right." After he left, Doc Wilson helped Sarah gather her few possessions. "He cares for you deeply," the doctor observed quietly. "I haven't seen him this alive in years." Sarah touched the revolver Ethan had given her, now tucked in her pocket. "I know." The leather-bound journal lay open on Sarah's lap, a gift from Doc Wilson before their hasty departure. Firelight flickered across the blank pages as she carefully formed each letter, the act of recording her story somehow making the chaos more manageable. "The baby kicked through the night," she wrote. "Strong, like she knows we're fighting for her future. Ethan says we're safe here, and I believe him. 3 days in this mountain cabin, and no sign of pursuit. The snow has covered our tracks completely." The hunting cabin was smaller than Ethan's ranch house, but solidly built and well-stocked, nestled in a sheltered valley accessible only by a narrow trail. It offered both sanctuary and defensibility. Sarah closed the journal as Ethan entered, bringing a blast of cold air and an armful of firewood. "Storm's getting worse," he reported, stacking logs beside the hearth. "Another foot of snow by morning, I'd wager. Good news for us. Best protection we could ask for." He brushed snow from his coat. "No one's following that trail until spring thaw." Relief eased the tension in Sarah's shoulders. Her due date was just 3 weeks away, according to Doc Wilson's calculations. "I found something," she said, gesturing toward a trunk she'd discovered while organizing supplies. "Letters. And this." She handed him a faded photograph, a younger Ethan standing beside an older man before this very cabin. "My father," he said quietly, studying the image. "Taught me everything about surviving out here. This was his place. You never mentioned him before." Ethan's weathered face softened with memory. "Stubborn as granite. Fought in the war between the states. Came west after. Couldn't stand civilization anymore." He set the photo aside. "Died here. Hunting accident 6 years back. I'm sorry." He nodded acknowledgement. "Was planning to sell this place. Never did. I'm glad," Sarah said softly. "It saved us." Their eyes met across the small room, a moment of connection that had been growing stronger each day. Since fleeing the ranch, something had shifted between them, urgency and shared danger breaking down the careful distance they'd maintained. "Your turn," Ethan said, settling into the chair opposite hers. "Been meaning to ask." "The father of your child," Sarah tensed slightly. "James, you mean?" "No, the real father." At her confused expression, he continued, "Assume the child wasn't his, the way he wanted to be rid of it." "The baby is James's," Sarah clarified, resting her hands protectively over her swollen belly. "That's what makes his rejection so painful. He simply decided a child would complicate his plans." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Man like that doesn't deserve the name father." "No," she agreed softly. "He doesn't." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters. Inside, the fire popped and hissed, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. "What happened?" Ethan asked after a long silence. "With your wife and son?" "You never said exactly." The question hung in the air. For a moment, Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. "Influenza swept through our mining town," he finally said, voice low. "Was working a cattle drive when it hit. Catherine sent a letter saying Jacob had fallen ill, but not to worry." His eyes fixed on some distant point. "By the time I got the telegram that she'd taken sick too, it was too late. Rode 3 days straight. Found the house silent." Sarah's throat tightened with shared grief. "You couldn't have known. Should have been there," he said simply. "Never forgave myself for that." Without thinking, Sarah moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his rough hand between her own. "You were trying to provide for them." Catherine would have understood that. His fingers tightened around hers. "Maybe." He looked down at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "After I couldn't bear being around people. Their pity. Their awkward words. Came here first, stayed for months, then bought the ranch. Kept to myself until a stranger collapsed at your gate," Sarah said with a small smile. "Until then." His free hand hesitantly touched her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Never expected. The baby chose that moment to kick vigorously, making Sarah gasp. She guided Ethan's hand to the spot. His eyes widened as he felt the movement beneath his palm. Strong, he murmured, wonder replacing grief in his expression. Like her mother, Sarah said. Like the man who's risked everything to protect us both. The fire crackled in the hearth. Snow continued to fall outside. And something precious and fragile bloomed in the space between them, something neither had dared name, but both had begun to cherish. Sarah returned to her journal later, adding a final line. Today I realized that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead exactly where we're meant to be. The carved wooden horse took shape beneath Ethan's knife, each careful stroke revealing the form hidden within the pine block. Shavings curled around his boots as he worked by the fire, the rhythmic scrape of blade against wood filling the comfortable silence. Sarah watched from her chair, knitting needles clicking as she crafted another tiny garment. 2 weeks had passed in the mountain sanctuary, their routine settling into peaceful harmony. The nesting instinct that Doc Wilson had warned might come had manifested not only in Sarah, but seemingly in Ethan as well. Yesterday he'd begun constructing a cradle from spare lumber, working with quiet intensity. It's beautiful, Sarah commented, nodding toward the carving. You never mentioned you were an artist. Ethan glanced up, a hint of embarrassment crossing his features. I wouldn't call it art, just something my father taught me. Passes the time during winter months. Your son would have treasures to play with, she observed softly, his hands stilled momentarily. Made Jacob a whole farm of animals. Catherine said we'd need a bigger house just for his toys. The memory brought a sad smile rather than pain, healing slowly taking root. The wooden horse was nearly finished, its flowing mane and powerful legs captured with surprising delicacy for hands more accustomed to ranch work. My father always said a child should have something handmade, Ethan explained, smoothing rough edges with a scrap of sandpaper. Something crafted with care. Sarah's heart swelled at the implication that this child, not his by blood, would have such a gift from him. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the distant sound of voices. Ethan was on his feet instantly, knife exchanged for rifle. Stay back, he ordered, moving to the window. Through the frosted glass, figures could be seen approaching on horseback, 3 men struggling through the deep snow. Hunters, Sarah whispered, fear clutching her throat. Ethan's expression remained grim as he peered through a small gap in the curtains. No, one's Andrews. Blood drained from Sarah's face. How? The snow? Local guide, looks like. Ethan's mind worked rapidly, assessing options. Back room, now. There's a trapdoor under the rug. Root cellar below. I won't leave you, Sarah. His voice brooked no argument. For the baby. Understanding the stakes, she gathered her shawl and hurried to the back room. The hidden door creaked as she descended into the cold darkness below, Ethan replacing the rug above her. Through the wooden planks, she could hear Ethan moving about, then the cabin door opening. Afternoon, came Ethan's deceptively casual greeting. Long way from town in this weather. Mr. Miller, Andrew's cultured voice carried clearly. Quite the coincidence finding you here. My hunting cabin, Ethan replied. No coincidence about it, indeed. And you're alone, I presume. As you see, Andrew's laugh held no humor. Sheriff Miller mentioned you might have headed south, but my associate Mr. Riggs here suggested checking the mountain trails first. Former tracker for the army, with quite the talent for finding people who don't wish to be found. Impressive, Ethan said flatly. Coffee! How hospitable. We'll gladly warm ourselves before continuing our search. The heavy tread of boots entered the cabin, followed by the scrape of chairs. Quaint accommodations, Andrews commented. Though I see you've prepared for a lengthy stay. Rather excessive supplies for one man. Winter in these mountains is unforgiving, indeed. Much like Mr. Blackwood when his property is taken. Sarah's hands clenched in the darkness, anger flaring at being referred to as property. Speaking of property, Andrews continued, what a charming toy. A gift, perhaps, for a child? Sarah's heart sank. The wooden horse. Hobby, Ethan answered tersely. Passes time. Mr. Miller, let's dispense with pretense. Andrew's tone hardened. Mrs. Blackwood's condition is quite delicate. The journey here must have been taxing. For her sake and her child's, tell us where she is. Told you. I'm alone. A new voice, rough with a frontier accent, joined the conversation. Boss tracks outside. 2 sets, one smaller. Woman's boots, I'd wager. Search the cabin, Andrews ordered. Sarah heard movement above, the thud of footsteps, objects being moved. Nothing in the bedroom, the tracker reported. Check again, Andrews insisted. Secret compartments, loose floorboards. The footsteps moved directly overhead. Sarah held her breath, one hand protectively covering her belly as dust filtered down through cracks in the planks. Mr. Miller, Andrews spoke again, obstruction of justice is a serious offense, as is harboring a mentally unstable woman against her husband's wishes. Found nothing because there's nothing to find, Ethan replied evenly. Now I think it's time you gentlemen moved on. Perhaps, Andrews conceded reluctantly, but we'll return with the sheriff and proper documentation. The snow won't last forever, Mr. Miller. After what seemed an eternity, the door closed and hoofbeats faded into the distance. Only then did Ethan lift the trapdoor, his face grim, as he helped Sarah climb out. They'll be back, she whispered. Ethan nodded, gathering the wooden horse from the table. Which is why we need to move, tonight. The Christmas star glowed warmly atop the small pine branch Ethan had brought inside, its points crafted from scraps of tin and polished to a shine. Sarah touched it gently, the simple decoration bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. It's perfect, she whispered. Their new refuge was a line shack belonging to a rancher friend of Ethan's, a single-room structure used by cowboys during seasonal roundups, now abandoned for the winter. After the close call at the hunting cabin, they had traveled through the night, taking a treacherous route through the mountains that even experienced trackers would struggle to follow. 3 days till Christmas, 4 weeks since fleeing the ranch, and mere days until Sarah's due date, the baby increasingly active, as if sensing the approaching time. Henry won't mind us using his place, Ethan assured her, stoking the small stove. Owes me from a cattle deal years back. Sarah settled heavily onto the cot, her body weary from the constant movement of recent weeks. Do you think they've given up searching? Not given up, Ethan replied honestly. But the weather's slowed them. Andrews isn't equipped for winter tracking. A knock at the door sent Ethan reaching for his rifle before a familiar voice called out, "It's us, Miller!" Relief washed over them both as Ethan opened the door to reveal Doc Wilson and Martha, their faces red from cold, arms laden with supplies. "Lord have mercy, girl. Look at you," Martha exclaimed, bustling towards Sarah. "Ready to burst any day now." "I'd say. 2 weeks to go," Sarah protested with a smile, accepting Martha's motherly embrace. "Baby decides when it's time. Not calendars," Martha replied, unpacking food from her basket. "Brought Christmas dinner. Wouldn't let you celebrate with just jerky and beans." Doc Wilson handed Ethan a bundle of newspapers. "Thought you should see these." Andrews has been busy in town. The headlines told the story. "Concerned husband seeks missing wife. Mentally disturbed woman kidnapped. Blackwood Shipping Air offers substantial reward." Sarah's hands trembled as she read. "He's portraying himself as the worried husband, and you as unstable," Doc added grimly. "But there's better news. Sheriff Miller's been asking questions of his own. Telegraphed contacts in Portland. Seems Mrs. Blackwood isn't the first wife to disappear from James Blackwood's life." Ethan's head snapped up. "What?" "First wife died under mysterious circumstances. Fell from a balcony, officially ruled accident. But there were rumors. Neighbors reported arguments," Martha added, setting out preserves and bread. "Household staff witnessed bruises." Hope kindled in Sarah's chest. "Can this help me?" "Maybe," Doc cautioned. "Sheriff's building a case, but territorial law still favors husbands significantly. As darkness fell, they shared a Christmas Eve meal that felt remarkably like family. Martha fussing over Sarah, Doc regaling them with town gossip, and Ethan more relaxed than Sarah had ever seen him. "Nearly forgot," Martha exclaimed, retrieving a package from her bag. A proper Christmas present. Inside was a beautiful christening gown, delicate white cotton with tiny embroidered flowers. My daughter's, Martha explained. Saved it all these years, waiting for the right baby. Sarah touched the fabric reverently. Martha, I can't accept nonsense. Every child deserves a proper welcome to this world. The older woman's eyes twinkled. Besides, I'll expect to be honorary grandmother. Later, after their visitors had departed with promises to return in a few days, Sarah and Ethan sat before the small decorated branch, the star catching firelight from the stove. I never thanked you properly, Sarah said quietly. For everything you've risked. Ethan shook his head. No need. There is, she insisted. My whole life I've depended on others. First my parents, then James. I believed I needed a man to survive. Her hand found his in the dim light. But you've shown me something different. Not dependence, but partnership. Strength shared, not taken. His calloused fingers tightened around hers. You're stronger than you know, Sarah. Because of you. She met his gaze steadily. Whatever happens, I want you to understand what you've given me. It's more than safety. It's possibility, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Ethan leaned forward slowly, hesitantly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Sarah closed the distance, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like coming home. When they parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. Been wanting to do that since you first opened your eyes in my cabin, Sarah smiled. I've been waiting. The moment was broken by a sharp knock at the door, a distinctive pattern that Ethan recognized. Sheriff, he murmured, reluctantly moving away. Sheriff Miller entered quickly, his expression grave. Got word from my deputy. James Blackwood arrived in Cottonwood this afternoon. Brought lawyers and men with guns. The Christmas star's light seemed to dim as reality intruded on their brief peace. There's more, the sheriff continued. He's filed papers claiming you kidnapped his wife. Ethan, there's a warrant for your arrest. The legal documents lay spread across the table in Sheriff Miller's office, their official seals and flowery language disguising their true nature. Sarah stared at them in disbelief, her hands shaking as she read the words that painted her as delusional, unstable, a danger to herself and her unborn child. Commitment papers, Sheriff Miller explained grimly, already signed by Judge Hammond. They just need a doctor's certification. These claims, Sarah's voice caught. None of this is true. The documents detailed a history of episodes that had never occurred, treatments she'd never received, physicians she'd never met. According to these papers, she'd been under specialized care for years before marrying James. Her mental fragility managed with his devoted oversight until her pregnancy triggered a severe decline. He's created an entire false history, Ethan said, anger evident in his rigid posture as he stood by the window, watching the street outside. The sheriff had smuggled them into town before dawn, using his office's back entrance to avoid detection. Blackwood's got witnesses too, Sheriff Miller added. Servants, doctors, business associates, all prepared to testify about your condition. Paid liars, Ethan growled, undoubtedly. But Judge Hammond won't see it that way. He and Blackwood's father were apparently old friends. Martha entered through the back door, her normally cheerful face drawn with worry. He's gathered quite the crowd at the hotel, she reported, playing the devastated husband beautifully. Even brought a nurse from some asylum in Denver, ready to care for Sarah when she's found. Sarah's hand moved protectively to her belly. He'll take my baby, she whispered. Everything he's doing, it's all to make sure I'm declared unfit after the birth. Doc Wilson, who'd been silently reviewing the medical portions of the documents, looked up with a sharp intake of breath. This name, Dr. Lawrence Sibley. I know him. All eyes turned to the doctor, prestigious physician in Chicago before moving west. Had a reputation for treating difficult wives of wealthy men. Doc's expression darkened. Women who were inconvenient often became patients. Few ever returned home. My God, Martha murmured. But there's something else, Doc continued, studying the papers more closely. These commitment documents reference treatments from Sibley spanning 3 years. including specific dates, fabrications, Sarah said dismissively. I never met the man. That's just it. Doc Wilson looked up, a glint of hope in his eyes. I can prove it. Sibley died 2 years ago in a carriage accident. I read his obituary in the medical journal. Sheriff Miller's eyebrows rose. Blackwood's team made a mistake. A crucial one, Doc agreed. They're using a dead man's credentials. If we can prove it. The office door burst open. Andrews stood there, flanked by 2 men with badges, federal marshals. Sheriff Miller. Andrews smiled coldly. Harboring fugitives now? How disappointing. Behind him stood a tall, elegantly dressed man with cold eyes and a practiced, concerned expression. James Blackwood. Sarah, my dear, he said smoothly. Thank God we've found you. Sarah instinctively stepped behind Ethan, who moved protectively in front of her. James Blackwood. Sheriff Miller asked, hand casually resting near his sidearm. Indeed. Here to reclaim my wife and unborn child. James's gaze hardened as it landed on Ethan. And to see this kidnapper prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The marshals stepped forward. Ethan Miller, we have a warrant for your arrest. On what charges? Ethan demanded. Kidnapping, interference with parental rights, and Jim, the marshal glanced at his papers. Threatening the life of an unborn child. That's absurd, Sarah cried. James stepped toward her, hand outstretched. Darling, you're confused. These delusions... Don't touch her, Ethan warned, his voice deadly quiet. Gentlemen, Doc Wilson intervened, as Mrs. Blackwood's physician, I must object to this stress in her condition. She's days from delivery. All the more reason she should be under proper care, James replied smoothly. I've brought a specialist from Denver, a nurse trained in managing difficult cases. The documents are fraudulent, Sheriff Miller stated flatly. Your Dr. Sibley has been dead for 2 years. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Andrew's face, but James never flinched. A clerical error easily corrected. We have amended papers from Dr. Hargrove in Portland. He produced another document from his coat. Signed yesterday and telegraphed to Judge Hammond this morning. Hope crumbled as quickly as it had formed. Sarah felt a sudden sharp pain low in her abdomen, gasping as she clutched Ethan's arm. Sarah! Alarm replaced anger in his voice. Something's wrong, she whispered as another pain gripped her. The baby! Doc Wilson was at her side instantly. How long between pains? Minutes, she managed. Started this morning. I thought, impracticed contractions. She's in labor, Doc announced, supporting her as her knees buckled. Perfect timing, James said coldly. Marshal, arrest Miller. My wife will come with me to... She's not going anywhere, Ethan interrupted, desperation in his eyes as Sarah's grip on his arm tightened with another contraction. She needs immediate medical attention, which she'll receive, James assured him with a smile that never reached his eyes. In Denver, under proper supervision. She won't survive the journey, Doc Wilson protested. The baby is coming now. Sarah looked up at Ethan, terror and pain mingling in her eyes. Don't let them take me, she pleaded. Don't let them take our baby. The word our hung in the air, its significance lost on no one. The baby cradle stood ready in Doc Wilson's back room, its simple pine construction solid and secure. Ethan had finished it during the night, working silently while Sarah's labor progressed in the next room. Every nail driven, every edge sanded had been an act of devotion and defiance against the men who waited. Outside, dawn light filtered through curtained windows as Sarah's exhausted cry mingled with the first wail of her newborn daughter. Ethan's head lifted at the sound, his hands stilling on the cradle's curved edge. A girl, Martha announced minutes later, appearing in the doorway with a weary smile. Healthy as can be. 7 pounds if she's an ounce. Ethan's stoic expression cracked, relief washing over his features. And Sarah? Tired but well. Doc says she's stronger than she looks. Martha wiped her hands on her apron. She's asking for you. In the birthing room, Sarah lay propped against pillows, her face pale but radiant as she cradled the tiny bundle against her chest. She looked up as Ethan entered, tears glistening in her eyes. "Come meet her," she whispered. He approached almost reverently, overwhelmed by the scene before him. The infant was impossibly small, with a dusting of dark hair and tiny fists that waved occasionally in protest against this new, bright world. "She's perfect," he murmured, reaching out hesitantly to touch one miniature hand. The baby's fingers reflexively closed around his rough index finger, and something shifted irrevocably in Ethan's heart. "She needs a name," Sarah said softly. "What were you thinking?" She met his gaze steadily. "Catherine, if that's all right." Emotion welled in Ethan's throat, rendering him momentarily speechless. He nodded, words failing him. Doc Wilson entered, breaking the intimate moment. "Marshall's outside again," he reported grimly, demanding to know when Sarah can travel. The brief peace shattered as reality intruded once more. Outside, James Blackwood and his men maintained their vigil, prevented from entering only by Doc Wilson's medical authority and Sheriff Miller's strategic delaying tactics. "The judge has ordered Sarah be transported to Denver as soon as medically possible," Doc continued. "For evaluation. She just gave birth," Ethan protested, protective anger rising. "She can't be moved. I bought us 3 days," Doc replied. "Testified it would be medically dangerous before then. But Hammond won't extend it further. He's already signed the commitment papers." Sarah clutched her daughter closer. "And the baby?" "James claims custody as the father. He's arranged for a wet nurse to accompany you both to Denver. He doesn't want her," Sarah said bitterly. "He never did. This is about controlling me, punishing me for leaving." "Actually, I think it's more calculated than that," Sheriff Miller said, joining them. "Martha's been asking questions around town. Seems Blackwood's business partnership, the one with the father of the young woman he's been courting, requires him to present a respectable front. Abandoning a wife and child would damage that image considerably, so he'd rather have me declared insane," Sarah concluded. "Committed to an asylum while he raises Catherine as the tragic widower whose wife lost her mind. And who nobly cares for her child despite everything," Martha added, disgust evident in her tone. "What can we do?" Sarah looked from face to face, desperate for a solution. "I won't let him take her." Ethan's expression hardened with resolve. "We need evidence, proof of his true character and intentions." "Perhaps we have some," Sheriff Miller said cautiously. Martha found something. "Show them." Martha produced a folded newspaper clipping from her pocket. "Portland Examiner 3 years back. Obituary for Elizabeth Blackwood, James's first wife. Tragic accident, it says. Fell from a balcony." "You mentioned this before," Ethan said. "Yes, but there's more." Martha unfolded another document. "My sister knows a woman who worked as a maid in the Blackwood house. She kept letters, correspondence between the first Mrs. Blackwood and her sister. Elizabeth was planning to leave James, had documented his abuse. She feared for her life." Hope kindled in Sarah's eyes. "Where are these letters now?" "On their way," Sheriff Miller answered. "Martha's sister is bringing them by stage. Due tomorrow, it won't be enough," Doc Wilson cautioned. "Not against Blackwood's influence with the judge. Maybe not for the law," Ethan conceded, "but for public opinion. If the territorial newspaper were to run the story, it could create enough controversy that Hammond would hesitate to enforce the commitment." Sheriff Miller finished thoughtfully. "And if Hammond delays," Doc added, "we could appeal to the federal circuit judge. He's known for his fairness." Baby Catherine fussed softly, and Sarah adjusted her swaddling with practiced gentleness, despite being a new mother. The protective instinct burned fiercely within her as she met Ethan's gaze. 3 days, she said with quiet determination. 3 days to save our future. Outside, James Blackwood paced the doctor's front porch, his polished appearance beginning to fray around the edges as his carefully constructed plans encountered unexpected resistance. 3 days seemed an eternity to a man accustomed to immediate compliance with his wishes. "Andrews," he snapped at his associate, "send a telegram to Judge Hammond. Inform him that Dr. Wilson is clearly conspiring with the kidnappers. We require immediate intervention." Andrews hesitated. "Sir, antagonizing the local doctor might not be wise. The townspeople respect him. I don't care about the goodwill of this backwater settlement, James hissed. I want my wife and child ready for transport to Denver in 24 hours. Not a minute more. What neither man noticed was Martha's niece Emma, sweeping the porch of the adjacent building, her young ears catching every word of their exchange. The hidden letters lay spread across Doc Wilson's dining table, their paper yellowed with age, the handwriting increasingly frantic as the dates progressed. Martha's sister had arrived on the afternoon stage, bringing with her the desperate correspondence of Elizabeth Blackwood. James's first wife. I fear what he might do, Sarah read aloud, her voice trembling as she recognized the familiar pattern. The servants have been dismissed except for those loyal to him. Last night he threatened that accidents befall women who defy their husbands. Ethan stood behind her chair, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. 2 days had passed since Catherine's birth, and the baby now slept peacefully in her cradle nearby, unaware of the battle being waged for her future. This last one, Martha's sister pointed to a letter dated a week before Elizabeth's death. She'd arranged to leave, had tickets to Boston. Her sister never heard from her again, and the authorities ruled it an accident, Sheriff Miller said grimly. Money speaks, Doc Wilson observed. As do connections. Blackwood had both. But we have something he doesn't, Ethan said, gathering the letters carefully. The truth. The territorial newspaper editor, a crusty veteran journalist named Hargrove, arrived an hour later, smuggled in through Doc's back door to avoid Blackwood's watchman. Quite the story, he admitted, after reviewing the letters and Sarah's account. But publishing this against a man of Blackwood's standing, he'd sue my paper into oblivion. Not if every word is verified, Sheriff Miller argued. We have the letters, Sarah's testimony, the doctor's documentation of her injuries, and this, Martha added, producing a sworn statement from her niece Emma. She overheard Blackwood instructing Andrews to pressure Judge Hammond. That he doesn't care about the child, just wants to avoid scandal. Hargrove's journalistic instincts visibly warred with his caution. It would need corroboration from Portland, someone willing to go on record about the first wife's death. Already telegraphed my colleague there, Doc Wilson said. Former housemaid is willing to testify about what she witnessed in the Blackwood household. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see James Blackwood engaged in heated conversation with a new arrival, a distinguished older man whose bearing suggested authority. Judge Hammond, Sheriff Miller identified him. Here in person, not a good sign. Time's running out, Ethan said urgently. Hargrove, will you print the story? The editor straightened his shoulders. Tomorrow's edition. Front page. It may be too late by then, Sarah said, desperation edging her voice as she watched the men outside approach Doc's front door. A sharp knock confirmed their fears. Dr. Wilson, Judge Hammond's voice carried clearly. I must insist you open this door immediately. Doc Wilson nodded to Sheriff Miller, who positioned himself near Sarah while the doctor answered. Judge Hammond entered, his imperious gaze sweeping the room before settling on Sarah. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Judge Hammond. I've come to personally oversee your transfer to appropriate medical facilities. She gave birth less than 3 days ago, Doc Wilson protested. Moving her remains medically inadvisable. I've consulted with specialists, the judge replied dismissively. They assure me short travel is acceptable given proper precautions. James entered behind him, satisfaction evident in his cold smile. Sarah, darling, it's time to come home. This isn't about my well-being, Sarah said, rising despite her weakness. Or our daughters. This is about silencing me, just like you silenced Elizabeth. James's expression faltered momentarily before his composure returned. You see, Judge? These delusions, imagining connections to my late wife's tragic accident. Not imagined, Ethan interjected, holding up the letters. Documented. Elizabeth feared for her life. With good reason, apparently. Irrelevant hearsay, James dismissed, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. Your Honor, Sarah appealed directly to the judge. Before you enforce those commitment papers, you should know the territorial newspaper is publishing the full story tomorrow. Elizabeth's letters, my testimony, evidence of fraud in the medical documentation you were provided. Judge Hammond's confident demeanor wavered. Mr. Blackwood assured me your condition was well documented by reputable physicians, including a Dr. Sibley, Doc Wilson added, who's been dead for 2 years. The judge's eyebrows rose sharply as he turned to James. Is this true? A clerical error, James insisted, though sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. Nothing more. Judge Hammond, Ethan stepped forward. You have a reputation for fairness. All we ask is time for the truth to come to light. Examine the evidence yourself before enforcing those papers. The judge hesitated, legal prudence warring with personal loyalties. 24 hours, he finally conceded. I'll review these materials and render my decision tomorrow. You can't seriously consider, James began. His mask of concern slipping. That will be all. Mr. Blackwood, the judge interrupted coldly. I suggest you return to your hotel while I examine these allegations. After they departed, relief temporarily lightened the atmosphere. It's not over, Sheriff Miller cautioned. Hammond and Blackwood's father were friends for decades. Blood runs thick, but doubt has been planted, Doc Wilson observed. That's something. Sarah crossed to the cradle, gazing down at her sleeping daughter. One more day, she whispered. One more day to fight for you. Ethan joined her, his hand finding hers. We'll win, he promised quietly. Whatever it takes. Outside, Andrews watched the doctor's house from across the street, a telegram in his pocket instructing him to take more decisive action should legal means fail. James Blackwood was not a man accustomed to losing. The sheriff's badge caught the moonlight as Miller secured it to his vest. Its silver star, a symbol of the law he'd sworn to uphold, even against men with wealth and influence. Outside Doc Wilson's house, shadows moved through the darkness. Not the usual night sounds of cottonwood, but the deliberate movement of men positioning themselves. 6 of them, Ethan reported, stepping away from the window. Armed, surrounding the building. The 24 hours Judge Hammond had granted were nearly expired, the newspaper with Elizabeth Blackwood's story set to print at dawn. But it seemed James had no intention of waiting for legal processes to conclude. He means to take them tonight, Sheriff Miller concluded, checking his revolver. Before the story breaks. Doc Wilson cradled baby Catherine, who fussed softly in her blankets. Sarah's in no condition to travel, let alone withstand whatever Blackwood has planned. In the bedroom, Sarah sat propped against pillows, her face pale but determined as Martha helped her dress. The revolver Ethan had given her weeks ago lay within reach on the bedside table. I won't go back to him, she said when Ethan entered. I won't let him take our daughter. The quiet, possessive "our" strengthened his resolve. Though not Catherine's father by blood, he'd claimed her in his heart from the moment she'd gripped his finger with her tiny hand. He'll have to go through me first, Ethan promised. The Winchester rifle solid in his hands. A sharp knock at the front door silenced the room. Andrew's voice carried clearly through the wooden panels. Dr. Wilson, Judge Hammond requires Mrs. Blackwood's presence immediately. Open up, please. At midnight? Sheriff Miller called back. Seems unlikely, Andrews. Sheriff Miller. Andrews' tone shifted to false concern. We'd heard disturbing reports that Mrs. Blackwood was being prevented from receiving necessary treatment. Mr. Blackwood fears for his wife and child's safety. His concern is noted, Miller replied dryly, as is the armed escort he's provided. Please inform Mr. Blackwood that I'll bring his wife to court in the morning, as Judge Hammond directed. A moment of silence followed. Then Andrew's voice returned, harder now. Sheriff, we have authorized commitment papers. If you obstruct their execution, you're breaking the law you're sworn to uphold. Sarah's hand found Ethan's, her fingers cold with fear. Outside, men moved closer to the house. This is your final warning, Andrews called. Send Mrs. Blackwood and the child out now, or we'll be forced to enter and retrieve them. Sheriff Miller positioned himself by the door, Doc Wilson and Martha moving deeper into the house with Catherine. Ethan led Sarah to the back room, where they'd prepared an escape route, a trapdoor to a storm cellar with access to the alley behind. "If shooting starts," he told her, "take Catherine and go. Martha's sister has a wagon waiting behind the church." Sarah gripped his arm. "Not without you." "I'll be right behind you," he promised, though they both recognized the uncertainty in his words. The front window shattered, glass spraying across the floor as a flaming torch arced through the opening. "Fire!" Miller shouted, kicking the burning brand back outside. "They're trying to smoke us out." More torches followed, some landing on the porch roof. Within minutes, flames licked up the front wall of the wooden structure. "It's time," Ethan said grimly, helping Sarah toward the trapdoor. Doc Wilson placed Catherine in her arms, the infant wailing at the commotion. "Go with them, Doc," Sheriff Miller ordered, firing through the window at shadowy figures. "I'll hold them here." Smoke began filling the rooms as Ethan helped Sarah and the others into the cellar passage. He paused at the entrance, torn between escorting them to safety and helping Miller defend against the attackers. "Go," the sheriff insisted. "They're what matters now." A bullet splintered the doorframe, deciding the matter. Ethan descended into the passage after the others, emerging moments later in the alley behind Doc's house. The night air was sharp with cold and the scent of smoke. "This way," Martha's sister whispered, leading them toward a waiting wagon. They had covered half the distance when a voice called from the darkness, "That's far enough." James Blackwood stepped into the moonlight, Andrews and two armed men beside him. In the distance, flames illuminated Doc's house, the diversion having served its purpose. "Sarah," James said smoothly, as if addressing a wayward child, "it's time to come home. You and my daughter." Ethan raised his rifle. "She's not going anywhere with you, Mr. Miller." James sighed with exaggerated patience. "Still playing the hero? You're outnumbered and outlawed." He produced a paper from his coat. "Judge Hammond signed amended papers this evening. You're to be arrested on sight after you set fire to the doctor's house." Sarah challenged, clutching Catherine to her chest. "After you tried to kill the sheriff?" "A tragic misunderstanding," James replied. "Clearly the work of overzealous deputies, which I'll personally investigate once my family is safe." His gaze hardened as he focused on the bundle in Sarah's arms. "Now hand over my child and step forward. The carriage is waiting to take us to Denver." "She's not your child," Sarah said with quiet defiance. "Not in any way that matters." James's calm facade cracked, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Andrews," he snapped, "take the baby." As Andrews stepped forward, Ethan positioned himself protectively before Sarah and Catherine. "Last chance, Blackwood," he warned. "Walk away, shoot him," James ordered his men, patience exhausted. "Take the woman and child alive." The sound of a pistol cocking came from behind James's group. "I wouldn't," Sheriff Miller's voice rang out, his badge catching moonlight as he emerged from the shadows, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder, but his aim steady. "Drop your weapons. All of you, now." The gold pocket watch in James's hand gleamed in the firelight, its ornate case a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. He checked it with deliberate casualness, as if merely late for a social engagement, rather than standing in an alley with armed men on both sides. "Sheriff Miller," he acknowledged coolly. "Survived the fire, I see. Unfortunate." "James Blackwood," Miller replied, his gun unwavering despite his injury. "You're under arrest for arson, attempted murder, and conspiracy." A thin smile crossed James's face. Bold accusations from a wounded man outnumbered 2-1. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, Sheriff Miller and Ethan on one side, James Andrews and the hired guns on the other, with Sarah and Catherine caught between. "Your men might reconsider their loyalty," Miller suggested. "Fire at the doctor's house has drawn attention. Town's waking up." Indeed, shouts and the sound of running feet could be heard approaching. The hired guns exchanged nervous glances. $50 more for each of you when this is finished," James snapped, noting their hesitation. "Not worth hanging," one muttered. Lowering his weapon, Andrews stepped closer to James, whispering urgently. But James shoved him aside. "I will not be defied," he hissed, his composure cracking. With unexpected swiftness, he drew a derringer from his coat pocket. "The child comes with me, at least." Before anyone could react, he lunged towards Sarah, reaching for Catherine. Ethan moved instantly, driving his shoulder into James's chest. The smaller gun discharged with a sharp crack, the bullet grazing Ethan's side as they crashed to the ground. The two men grappled in the dirt, James's refined appearance dissolving as he fought with desperate ferocity. He struck Ethan's wounded side, eliciting a grunt of pain. "She's mine," James snarled, his mask of civility completely gone. "Everything I have is mine to control." Ethan's fist connected with James's jaw, snapping his head back. "She's not property," he growled. "Neither of them are." Sheriff Miller kept his weapon trained on Andrews and the remaining guard, preventing them from interfering. From the corner of his eye, he saw Doc Wilson ushering Sarah and the baby toward the waiting wagon. James spotted them too. With renewed strength born of rage, he broke free of Ethan's grip and scrambled toward his fallen derringer. "You'll never have them," he spat, raising the gun toward the retreating figures. Ethan tackled him from behind, the derringer firing harmlessly into the air. They crashed against a stack of crates, wood splintering around them. James's watch fell from his pocket, sliding across the ground. "It's over, Blackwood," Ethan said, pinning the smaller man beneath him. "Nothing is over until I say it is," James seethed. "Do you have any idea who I am? What power I wield? I own judges, governors. I'll hunt them to the ends of the earth." His hand closed around a broken crate slat. With a vicious swing, he struck Ethan across the temple. Blood trickled into Ethan's eye as James scrambled free. Retrieving his gun once more, disoriented, Ethan struggled to focus as James aimed the derringer, not at him, but at Sarah, who stood frozen near the wagon 20 yards away. "If I can't have them," James said with chilling calm, "neither will you." A single gunshot echoed in the alley. James staggered, confusion crossing his features as he looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his expensive waistcoat. Behind him stood Sarah, Ethan's revolver steady in her hands. "You forgot what you taught me, James," she said quietly. "To disappear when threatened, to become invisible." The derringer slipped from his fingers as he sank to his knees. "You shot me," he said incredulously. "You were going to kill my child," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the trembling of her body. "My daughter." James collapsed to the ground, clutching his wound. Not fatal, but serious enough to end his threat. Behind him, Andrews and the hired gun dropped their weapons. Seeing the tide had turned decisively, townspeople arrived led by Martha, carrying lanterns that illuminated the scene. The burning doctor's house, the wounded sheriff, James bleeding on the ground, and Sarah still holding the smoking gun. "Get Doc Wilson," Sheriff Miller ordered, "and someone fetch Judge Hammond. He needs to see this with his own eyes." Ethan moved to Sarah's side, gently taking the revolver from her shaking hands. "It's over," he murmured. "You're both safe now." Tears streaked through the soot on her face as the enormity of what had happened, what she had done, washed over her. Catherine whimpered in Martha's arms nearby, sensing the tension. "I couldn't let him," Sarah whispered. "I couldn't let him hurt anyone else." "I know." Ethan pulled her gently against him, mindful of his own wounds. "You protected your family." "Our family." Judge Hammond arrived minutes later, taking in the chaotic scene with stunned disbelief. Doc Wilson was already tending to James's wound, his physician's oath compelling him to help even the man who had tried to destroy them. "Judge Hammond," Sheriff Miller said formally, despite his blood-soaked shirt, "I believe you have some commitment papers that need reconsidering." The judge's gaze moved from James to Sarah, then to the baby in Martha's arms. Something shifted in his expression. Realization, perhaps, or simply humanity reasserting itself over politics. "Indeed," he said gravely, "it appears I've been gravely misled about many things." Dawn was breaking over Cottonwood as Ethan led Sarah and Catherine away from the scene, the first light of a new day illuminating their path forward, together. The adoption papers lay on Judge Hammond's desk, their formal language conferring legal status to what the heart had already decided. Sarah watched as Ethan signed his name with careful precision, making official his role as Catherine's father. 1 month had passed since the confrontation in the alley. James Blackwood had survived his wound, only to face multiple charges: attempted murder, arson, conspiracy, and falsifying legal documents. His carefully constructed empire of influence had crumbled as newspapers across the territory carried the story of Elizabeth's suspicious death and Sarah's ordeal. "That concludes the formalities," Judge Hammond announced. His manner towards them transformed from the imperious official who had arrived to enforce James's will. In light of Mr. Blackwood's crimes and the evidence of his intentions, the court grants full custody of Catherine Miller to her mother, Sarah, and her adoptive father. "Ethan," the judge affixed his seal to the document, making it official. "Mrs. Blackwood, or perhaps I should say Mrs. Miller now, you'll be pleased to know that the divorce decree has also been approved. Your former husband's circumstances eliminated the usual obstacles. Sarah's hand found Ethan's, their fingers intertwining. The simple gold band on her finger, placed there just a week ago in a quiet ceremony at Martha's home, caught the light from the office window. "Thank you, Your Honor," Ethan said, his normally reserved manner softened by the significance of the moment. "For everything," Judge Hammond nodded, a hint of remorse in his expression. "Justice delayed is justice denied, they say. I allowed old loyalties to cloud my judgment. For that I can only apologize." Outside the courthouse, Martha waited with Catherine, the baby contentedly sleeping against her ample bosom despite the cold February air. "Well?" she demanded as they descended the steps. Sarah's radiant smile provided answer enough. "It's done. She's officially Catherine Elizabeth Miller now." Martha's eyes misted as she carefully transferred the sleeping infant to Sarah's arms. "Never doubted it for a moment. That child was meant to be yours, both of yours." They walked together through Cottonwood's main street, now familiar territory after weeks of recovery in town. Their ranch had been too remote for Sarah's healing after childbirth and Ethan's gunshot wound, especially with the harsh winter weather. "Sheriff says the last of James's men left on yesterday's stage," Martha reported. "Good riddance to the lot of them. And James?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the name that once would have filled her with terror. "Trials set for spring in Denver," Ethan answered. "Sheriff Miller will testify. Doc Wilson too. He'll still have money." "Connections," Sarah observed, the practical concerns never far from mind. "Different now," Ethan assured her. "His business partners have dissolved their arrangements. The scandal's too great, even for Blackwood money to overcome. They reached Doc Wilson's house, rebuilt with the town's help after the fire, where they'd been staying during their recovery. The doctor himself sat on the porch, enjoying a rare moment of leisure. "The proud family returns," he called, rising to greet them. "All official now." "Signed and sealed," Ethan confirmed, a smile softening his weathered features. "Catherine's legally mine." "Been yours since the first time you held her," Doc observed wisely. "Paper just catches up to what the heart decides." Inside, Sarah settled Catherine in her cradle, the one Ethan had built that night at the mountain cabin, somehow salvaged and brought to town. The carved wooden horse stood guard on the shelf above, the first of many treasures Ethan had created for his daughter. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, watching Sarah tuck blankets around the sleeping infant, "about the ranch." Sarah looked up, a question in her eyes. "It's a good place, solid, but perhaps—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Perhaps not the best place for raising a child, remote, hard winters." "What are you suggesting?" "Doc Wilson mentioned the Ferguson place is for sale. Just outside town, good land, proper house with real glass windows." Ethan's eyes held hers. "Catherine could go to school without a half-day's ride. You'd have Martha nearby." The consideration behind his words touched Sarah deeply. The lonely rancher who had once cherished isolation, now thinking of community, of family needs beyond his own. "The ranch is your home," she said gently. "I wouldn't ask you to leave it." "Home isn't a place," Ethan replied, taking her hands. "Took me 10 years to learn that. Home is where you both are, Sarah rose on tiptoe to kiss him, a gesture still new enough to bring a flush to his cheeks. "Then we'll look at the Ferguson place tomorrow." Outside, snow began to fall gently, covering Cottonwood in a blanket of white. Inside, the small family, forged in crisis, tempered by struggle and bound by choice rather than blood, rested in the peace they had fought so hard to secure. On the mantel, Sarah's journal lay open to a fresh page. The first entry in their new life already begun. "Today, we became what we already were, a family, not through circumstance or obligation, but through the most powerful choice of all, love." The family portrait hung above the fireplace in the Ferguson farmhouse, capturing a moment of quiet joy. Sarah seated with 1-year-old Catherine on her lap, Ethan standing proud beside them, his hand resting gently on Sarah's shoulder. Their expressions held the serene confidence of people who had weathered storms and emerged stronger. Spring sunlight filtered through lace curtains, Martha's wedding gift, casting dappled patterns across the polished wooden floors. Outside, fruit trees bloomed in the orchard Ethan had planted last autumn, white blossoms promising future harvests. "Papa! Papa!" Catherine's voice rang out as she toddled across the porch on sturdy legs, arms outstretched toward Ethan returning from town. At 14 months, she was a determined explorer, her dark hair and bright eyes reminiscent of Sarah, but with a stubborn tilt to her chin that everyone agreed came straight from Ethan. He swung her up easily, her delighted giggles a sound that still amazed him daily, this joy he'd never expected to know again. "What treasures did you find today?" Sarah asked, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron as she joined them on the porch. "Mail," Ethan answered, setting Catherine down to pull an envelope from his pocket. "From Denver," Sarah's expression sobered. News from Denver typically concerned James Blackwood's ongoing legal saga. "Read it," she said, lifting Catherine onto her hip. Ethan broke the seal, unfolding the official correspondence. "Sentencing is complete. 5 years for the arson and attempted murder charges." "Only 5 years," Sarah murmured, her tone unreadable. "There's more." Ethan continued reading. "The Portland authorities have reopened the investigation into Elizabeth's death. New witnesses have come forward." A complexity of emotions crossed Sarah's face. Not satisfaction exactly, but perhaps the solemn recognition that justice, however delayed, was finally finding its course. "Sheriff Miller sends his regards," Ethan added, tucking the letter away. "Says the reward money for capturing James has been released. He'll bring it out tomorrow." "What will we do with it?" Sarah asked, following him inside where the scent of baking bread filled the warm kitchen. Ethan removed his hat, hanging it precisely on its peg, a man whose orderly habits remained unchanged despite all else that had transformed in his life. "Thought perhaps a trust for Catherine's education. And maybe—" He hesitated, a hint of nervousness unusual for his stoic demeanor. "Maybe start one for the next little one too." Sarah's eyes widened as his meaning registered. "Ethan Miller, are you saying you want another child?" A slow smile warmed his weathered features. "Family suits me better than I expected, if you're willing." Her response was to cross the room and wrap her arms around him, Catherine giggling between them at the unexpected embrace. Later that afternoon, Doc Wilson and Martha joined them for Sunday dinner, a tradition established in the year since they'd moved to the Ferguson place. The doctor had officially retired from practice, but remained the community's unofficial counselor and wisest voice. "To new beginnings," Doc proposed, raising his glass as they sat around the table Ethan had crafted from timber harvested on their old ranch land. "And to those who helped us find them," Sarah added, her gaze moving around the table with profound gratitude after dinner, while Catherine napped and the others lingered over coffee. "Sheriff Miller arrived with unexpected news beyond the reward. Telegram came yesterday," he reported. "James Blackwood died in prison. Fever swept through the cells." A heavy silence followed his words, each person processing the implications differently. "Is it wrong," Sarah finally asked, "that I feel nothing but relief?" "After what he did," Martha shook her head emphatically, "seems the most natural reaction in the world. The man made his choices, Ethan said quietly, and we've made ours. When their guests departed as twilight descended, Sarah and Ethan stood on their porch, watching the first stars appear over land that had become truly theirs, not just in deed, but in the life they'd built upon it. Catherine slept peacefully in her room upstairs. Surrounded by the wooden animals, Ethan continued to carve for her growing collection. The carved horse that had started it all held place of honor on her bedside table. "A year ago today," Sarah said softly, "I was hiding in a cellar while James's men searched the cabin." Ethan's arm tightened around her waist. "Not a thought I like remembering." "No," she agreed, "but important to remember nonetheless. How far we've come. What we overcame." In the distance, lights from Cottonwood twinkled, close enough for community, but far enough for the privacy they both still valued. The farmhouse stood as a testament to their journey, its solid foundation like the trust they'd built, its walls sheltering the family they'd forged through choice rather than circumstance. "I never thought I'd find this again," Ethan admitted. "The night making it easier to voice vulnerable truths. After Catherine, my first Catherine, and Jacob died, I believed that part of life was over for me." Sarah leaned against his shoulder. "And I never knew it could exist at all. Not like this." Above them, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like promises kept. Behind them, their daughter slept safely in the home they'd created together. Before them stretched a future neither had dared imagine a year ago. Ordinary in its daily rhythms, but extraordinary in its hard-won peace. "Come to bed," Sarah said softly. Taking his hand, Ethan nodded, taking one last look at the starlit landscape before following her inside. Closing the door gently on the world outside, not to shut it away, as he once had, but to embrace the world they'd built within.